You wake up and something already feels wrong. Not a panic attack, not sadness, just a tightness in your chest. Like your soul is trying to whisper through your ribcage, and you've learned to ignore it. You move through the day like a ghost in your own body, smiling, working, answering people. But somewhere deep in you, this isn't how life is supposed to feel. There's a silence in your mind that used to be curiosity, a stillness in your chest that used to be fire. And the worst part? You've gotten good at pretending this is normal. Let me tell you something no one told you. You're not broken, but you are betraying yourself, because most of what you call you was constructed by survival, not by choice. Your identity, your emotions, even your sense of meaning, they're scripts, written by pain, reinforced by culture, powered by fear. But here's the truth. Your mind is not a prison. It's a blueprint, and it can be rewritten. What you're feeling, this numbness, this restlessness, this quiet collapse, is not a flaw. It's a signal. It's your soul asking for psychological freedom, for emotional clarity, for a new inner ecosystem. You don't need to fix your mental health. You need to build a self you actually belong in. Stay with me, because once you understand what's really been shaping your emotions, your choices, your identity, you'll never see yourself the same way again. And that's the beginning of everything. You've made it this far. Something in you knew the numbness wasn't the end of the story. But here's what's really happening. You're not just feeling emotions. You're reliving them, over and over. Same shame, same rage, same sadness curling in your stomach, like muscle memory of pain. And you've been told that emotions are reactions, that they just happen to you, but they don't. According to neuroscientist Feldman Barrett, emotions are not responses, they're predictions. Your brain scans the moment, compares it to the past, and decides how you should feel before anything even happens. Let that sink in. You're not just reacting to now. You're anticipating old pain and calling it reality. So that sudden irritation when someone looks at you a certain way, that feeling of rejection before anyone says a word, that instinct to shut down when things get intense, that's not you being too emotional. That's your emotional system trying to protect you by running old scripts. And the more those scripts repeat, the deeper they get etched into your nervous system, until they're not just feelings, they become who you think you are. But they're not. They're just habits. And habits can be broken. Emotional reactivity isn't a personality trait. It's a default setting. One you didn't choose, but one you can absolutely rewire. But first, you have to see it. You have to notice when your chest tightens before you even speak, when your jaw clenches in silence, when you're already bracing for something that hasn't happened. That's emotional gravity. It keeps pulling you back into yourself, into a version of you shaped by the past. But here's the shift. Once you begin to notice the granularity of your emotions, not just I'm sad or I'm angry, but what kind of sadness? What flavor of anger? What's under it? You start creating space. You interrupt the pattern, and in that space you don't just react, you choose. That's when you stop being a passenger of your emotional ecosystem and start becoming its architect. This is what real mental health transformation looks like. Not just coping, but cultivating emotional authorship. And it begins with one brutal truth. Your emotions are lying to you, just enough to keep you stuck, but only if you never question them. In the next chapter, we'll take it deeper. Because beneath your emotions, there's something more terrifying than pain. It's meaninglessness. And that's where most people get lost. But you don't have to. Let's keep going. You're beginning to see it now. How your emotional patterns were never just reactions, but rehearsals. But here's the truth underneath them, the one most people avoid. You're not just battling emotions, you're battling meaning. There's a silent fear most can't name, but it sits in the chest like cold gravity. What if none of this means anything? Not your career, not your relationships, not even your healing. And that fear doesn't scream, it numbs. It disguises itself as anxiety, apathy, or distraction. That's the real void. Not chaos, but emptiness. Psychiatrist Viktor Frankl saw this clearly after surviving Auschwitz. He said the greatest human drive isn't pleasure or power, it's meaning. Without it, suffering becomes unbearable. With it, suffering becomes bearable, and even transformative. That's not poetic, that's psychological reality. If your pain feels pointless, it will consume you. But if it feels connected to something larger, it can become the furnace that forges you. That's the power of reframing despair. not as an enemy, but as a signal, a wake-up call that your current definition of meaning, or identity, no longer fits. That's why you feel like you're falling apart. You're not broken. You're outgrowing a life that no longer reflects you. And here's the brutal truth. If you don't confront the void, you'll keep trying to fill it with noise, or numb it with perfectionism, distractions, or endless fixing. But the void doesn't want to be filled. It wants to be faced. Frankl developed something called logotherapy, a way of helping people move through suffering by restoring meaning. One of his tools was paradoxical intention, doing the exact opposite of what your fear demands. Another was de-reflection, shifting focus away from obsessive pain and toward contribution. But the most powerful tool? The Socratic dialogue, asking yourself questions so deep they unravel your false assumptions. Not, how do I stop feeling anxious? But, what does my anxiety think it's protecting me from? Not, how do I become better? But better, for who? This is the existential shift, where you stop treating despair as dysfunction and start treating it as invitation. Because behind every breakdown, there's a question your soul is dying for you to answer. The question isn't, how do I fix my mind? It's, what am I truly living for? And you don't need to have the answer yet. You just need the courage to ask the right questions and not look away. In the next chapter, we'll explore the hidden power of choice, the last freedom they can't take from you. Because when everything falls apart, your stance toward it is where you begin again. You've faced the void. You've stopped pretending that meaning will magically appear. You now understand. Despair isn't dysfunction, it's direction. And this leads us to one of the hardest, most liberating truths of all. You always have a choice, even when everything else is taken. Viktor Frankl wrote this from inside a concentration camp. Everything can be taken from a person, except the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. That statement isn't motivational fluff. It's forged from suffering. And yet most of us live like we're trapped. Trapped by circumstances, by trauma, by emotional gravity. But we're not. What we're really trapped by is the belief that choice only exists when we feel good. That we can only act once clarity, confidence, or control shows up. But real freedom isn't about waiting for better feelings. It's about choosing in spite of them. And that's where people get stuck. They say, I can't help how I feel. And maybe you can't, at first. But here's the shift. You can still choose what you do with it. You can feel fear and still speak up. You can feel shame and still show up. You can feel the pull of old patterns and still take one step in a different direction. That's choice. That's power. Jean-Paul Sartre called this the burden of freedom. It's terrifying because it means you're responsible for how you meet your life, even when it breaks you. But it's also sacred because no one, not your past, not your emotions, not even your pain, can take that from you. And yet, here's the brutal truth. Most people give away their freedom in the name of comfort. They let old wounds decide their boundaries. They let fear masquerade as logic. They let emotions make choices that only values should be making. That's not healing. That's self-abandonment disguised as survival. But when you start seeing choice as sacred, you stop waiting for permission to become who you were meant to be. Mental health isn't just about managing symptoms. It's about reclaiming authorship, reclaiming the right to stand up and say, this is the life I choose to live, regardless of what I feel right now. That's not denial, that's evolution. And this is the turning point. From here on, you stop asking your pain for permission, and you start leading from your values, not your wounds. In the next chapter, we'll dive into how to do that with precision through a practice called emotional agility. Because now that you've reclaimed your freedom, you'll need the tools to use it well. You've reclaimed your freedom. You've stopped asking pain for permission to live. But here's the next brutal truth. Freedom without direction becomes chaos. And that's where most people fall back into old patterns, not because they're weak, but because they don't know how to move through emotion without drowning in it. This is where emotional agility becomes your anchor. Psychologist Susan David explains, emotions are not instructions. They are data, not directives. And when you treat them like dictators, you give your worst moments the power to shape your entire life. That's how reactivity begins. You don't respond to life. You echo old wounds. But emotional agility teaches you to pause, to notice the space between what you feel and what you do. And that space is where your real self lives. Let's break it down. First, you pause. Not forever. Just long enough to catch the wave before it crashes. Then, you name the emotion. Not vaguely, specifically. Not "I feel bad," but "this is guilt." This is fear dressed as logic. This is loneliness pretending to be anger. Next, you feel it. Not analyze it. Feel it. Let it burn in your chest. Let it shake your hands. Let it be real, without letting it become your identity. Then you reflect. Ask, what matters to me here? Not what you want to avoid, not what you want to control, but what actually aligns with the kind of life you're building. Finally, you act aligned. Even if your voice trembles, even if it's uncomfortable, even if the emotion screams, don't do it. That's emotional agility. It's not suppressing. It's not indulging. It's moving through. Neuroscientist Daniel Siegel calls this integration, linking body sensations, emotions, narrative memory, and conscious reflection. When you do that, your brain literally rewires. You stop being a puppet of past emotion and start becoming a conscious presence inside your own mind. And the shift is subtle but seismic. You stop asking, "How do I stop feeling this?" and start asking, "How do I walk through this without betraying myself?" That's the real practice. Not perfect calm, not emotional control, but emotional connection with direction. It will feel messy. It will feel unnatural at first, because you've been trained to either explode or suppress. But now, you're learning something different. Presence without collapse, feeling without fusion. And once you get a taste of that, you'll never settle for reactivity again. In the next chapter, we'll build your inner fortress, not by avoiding emotion, but by becoming unshakable inside it. It's time to meet the stoic within you. You've learned to pause, to name your emotions, feel them, reflect, and move with purpose. But here's what most people miss. Even when you move with clarity, life will still shake you. You'll still face sudden loss, unexpected betrayal, moments that hit like a punch to the chest when you were finally catching your breath. And this leads us to something ancient, not a trend, but a pillar. Stoicism. Not the pop psych version that tells you to suppress your feelings, but the deeper truth that no matter what happens around you, you can choose how you relate to it within you. Marcus Aurelius, emperor and philosopher, wrote this in his journal. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. This isn't about emotional detachment. It's about emotional containment. The storm is real, but the flood doesn't have to reach your core. Mental health doesn't mean you stop feeling pain. It means pain stops defining you. That's what the Stoics practiced. Responding instead of reacting, holding space instead of collapsing into chaos, building an inner fortress where meaning survives impact. But how do you actually do that? It starts with this brutal truth. Your emotions are not the full story. They're the first signal, not the final authority. You feel disrespected, rejected, unseen. That's real. But now you've built emotional agility, so you don't just react. You pause, you breathe, you decide what this moment means. That's where resilience begins, not by pretending you're okay, but by refusing to let external events overwrite your internal code. It's not about faking strength, it's about forging it. When a Stoic is in crisis, they don't numb out. They ground in what matters most: virtue, purpose, integrity, direction. This doesn't eliminate pain, it frames it. So when life hits you, you don't say, "Why is this happening to me?" You say, "What kind of person do I choose to be in this?" That's not spiritual bypass, that's psychological sovereignty. And here's the paradox. When you stop trying to control what you can't, you gain full control over the one thing that always mattered: your stance. This is the Stoic anchor. Not to avoid the waves, but to stand inside them, unshaken. Mental health at its core is this: not escaping emotion, but holding it in a way that keeps your center intact. In the next chapter, we'll make this inner strength trainable, using neuroscience, not just philosophy. Because your inner ecosystem isn't built in theory. It's shaped by practice. And it's time to rewire your foundation. You've anchored yourself in meaning. You've stood inside storms and refused to be erased by them. But here's what's often misunderstood. Mental resilience isn't just about surviving intensity. It's about shaping your baseline. And that leads us to one of the most powerful truths. Your brain is trainable. And more than that, your identity is too. Neuroscientist Hanson calls it installing inner resources. It's not theory, it's neuroplasticity. Your brain's ability to rewire itself based on where you place your attention and what you repeatedly experience. Here's the brutal part. Your nervous system doesn't care if the experience is helpful or harmful. It just learns through repetition. So if you constantly rehearse stress, scarcity, and emotional reactivity, you're literally wiring yourself for survival, not peace. But the inverse is also true. If you begin rehearsing micro moments of gratitude, presence, and emotional clarity, you start to reshape who you are, not just how you feel. This is the moment your mental health work stops being a response to crisis and starts becoming the architecture of your identity. But it won't feel profound at first. In fact, it'll feel underwhelming. You'll pause for 3 seconds to feel your breath. You'll notice sunlight on your face. You'll say one kind word to yourself after a mistake, and your mind will say, "That's not enough." But here's what's really happening. You're installing a new emotional operating system, not through intensity, but through consistency. Hanson explains it this way. Your brain is like Velcro for negativity and Teflon for positivity. So to counter that bias, you have to slow down positive moments long enough for your brain to register them. That means when you feel even the slightest relief, you stay with it for 10-20 seconds. You feel it in your chest. You breathe into it. You let it land. That's not fluff. That's neural rewiring in real time. It's how you shift from a crisis-based identity to a growth-based nervous system. Because the truth is, most people wait until they're falling apart to care about their mind. But you're doing something different now. You're building your emotional infrastructure before the next storm. And over time, that becomes who you are. Not reactive, not panicked, but deeply resourced. You stop living as a collection of survival responses, and you start becoming someone who generates stability from the inside out. In the next chapter, we'll look at what happens when you start dismantling the old stories you've been living inside, the identity you didn't choose, but unconsciously became. Because to truly evolve, you don't just need new habits. You need a new self-narrative. You've been rewiring your inner world, not by force, but through repetition, presence, and emotional clarity. But here's what's still holding many people back. Even when they build better habits, they're still trapped inside an outdated self. Because the biggest illusion isn't your emotions, it's your identity. And this leads us to a sobering truth. Who you think you are is not fixed. It's not your authentic self. It's a pattern, a prediction. Feldman Barrett and Daniel Siegel both explain that your brain doesn't just predict emotions. It predicts who you are, based on memory, sensation, past feedback, and repeated behaviors. Which means you've been performing a self that was assembled through survival, not sovereignty. Let that land. The version of you who shuts down in conflict. The one who believes they're too much or not enough. The one who keeps playing caretaker, fixer, overachiever, ghost. That version didn't come from your core. It came from adaptation, from moments where being fully, you felt dangerous. So you adjusted, you complied, you shaped yourself into something acceptable, then called it personality. But personality is just persistence over time. It's habitual selfhood. And this is the gateway. If identity is constructed, then identity can be reconstructed. But reconstruction doesn't begin with force. It begins with curiosity. You start by noticing when you say things like, "I've always been this way. That's just how I am. I can't help it." Pause. Feel that in your body. The tightness, the resignation, the quiet defeat in that sentence. Now ask, who taught you to say that? Who benefits when you stay that small? Here's the brutal truth. The story you live in shapes the life you tolerate. So if you want a different life, you have to question the narrator. And the most powerful way to do that is to start inviting new micro-experiences that don't match your current self-concept. You don't need to become a new person overnight. You just need to experience yourself differently for a moment. Speak up when you'd usually stay silent. Rest when you'd usually prove yourself. Say no without guilt. Try something uncomfortable and survive it. Each of these moments becomes a crack in the script, a new data point, a neural disruption, and your brain starts recalibrating. Maybe I'm not who I thought I was. This isn't about pretending. It's about expanding. Because the truth is, You're not here to play the role they gave you. You're here to become someone you haven't met yet. And in the final chapter, we'll explore exactly what that means, how to step outside every invisible narrative and live on your own terms, not as a performance, but as a rebellion, rooted in truth. You've seen it now. Your emotions aren't commands. Your habits aren't identity. Your story isn't fate. Everything you thought was fixed isn't. And this leads us to the most powerful shift of all. You don't need permission to become who you really are, but you will need courage. Because here's the truth. You've been living inside invisible scripts, not malicious ones, just inherited. Scripts that told you who to be to feel loved, safe, accepted. Be the smart one. Be the strong one. Be the quiet one. Never need too much. Never ask too loudly. Keep your pain polite. And at some point you believed it. You confused survival strategies with personality. You performed the version of yourself that wouldn't get rejected. And it worked. For a while. But now it's suffocating. There's a version of you beneath all that. Not perfect, not fearless, but honest. That version isn't loud. It doesn't scream for attention. It waits, quietly, beneath the mask, for you to stop performing and start choosing. This is what Søren Kierkegaard meant when he said authenticity is a kind of rebellion, not against others, but against the roles you never agreed to play. And Sartre called it bad faith when you live as if you have no freedom, even when you do. Here's the brutal truth. You're not tired because you're broken. You're tired because you've been dragging a life that was never yours. Mental health isn't about polishing the mask. It's about removing it, slowly, compassionately, without shame, until what's left is someone real enough to breathe again. This is your existential rebellion. Not explosive, not dramatic, but quiet, consistent, unshakable. It looks like saying no without explanation. It looks like crying without apology. It looks like resting without guilt. It looks like making choices that don't make sense to others, but finally make sense to you. Because the ultimate freedom isn't having no pain. It's having pain that belongs to your path, not to someone else's expectations. And that's the turning point. When you stop chasing healing as a way to fit back in, and start becoming someone who doesn't need to belong anywhere to feel whole. You don't have to escape your past. You don't have to rewrite every memory. You just have to stop giving your future to versions of you that were only built to survive. Because now, you're not here to survive. You're here to live, fully, messily, truthfully, on your terms. And if you feel something rising inside right now, a flicker of clarity, a drop of permission, a quiet, finally, whispered in your chest, don't ignore it. That's you, the real you, and you're just getting started. You started this journey feeling a silent pressure under your ribs, an unnamed weight most of us drag through life. Now you know why it was there. You learned that emotions are predictions, not prison guards. That meaningless pain becomes bearable when you claim purpose. That choice, your last true freedom, never leaves you, even when everything else does. You practiced emotional agility, anchored yourself in stoic resilience, rewired your brain through micro-habits, and cracked open the scripts that once defined your identity. Here's the thread that ties it all together. Mental health is not a repair shop. It's the architecture of the self you're choosing to inhabit. When you master that architecture, anxiety turns into early warning data, not a life sentence. Habits become neural investments in the person you're becoming. Identity evolves from a survival pattern into a conscious design. And the moment you realize you can author your inner ecosystem, the external world stops feeling like destiny and starts looking like raw material. So where do you go from here? 1. Stay in the practice. Keep the 5-step pause. Name, feel, reflect, act cycle alive today, before the day hijacks you. 2. Install one new inner resource. Hold a moment of genuine calm or gratitude for 20 seconds. Wire it in. Repeat tonight. 3. Break one invisible script. Say a single honest no, rest without guilt, or speak up once where you'd normally stay silent. Small crack, big shift. 4. Share the rebellion. Send this video to someone who's silently performing a life that's killing them. Become each other's anchor. 5. Join the next exploration. In our upcoming video, we'll expose the hidden habits that sabotage your clarity, so you never fall back into autopilot. If even one line here felt like the truth you'd been waiting to hear, don't let it drift into the background noise of good ideas. Act on it today. Comment below. Which script are you ready to rewrite first? Your words might be the mirror someone else needs. You don't owe the world another well-polished mask. You owe yourself the chance to live unedited, open-hearted, mentally resilient, and relentlessly authentic. Stay curious. Stay courageous. And remember, the life you're craving isn't somewhere out there. It's already growing inside the choices you make next.